welcome everybody. On behalf of the Josephy Center, I'm welcoming you. Cheryl Cochran's not here because she was down watching the girls' track team, which I heard just won state. Which has a lot of connections, and you'll see later in this program. Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Douglas Dietrich from Portland, who is going to run the program tonight and is managing this grant along with it. Yeah. That's it. I don't have I mean, you don't want to turn me loose up here. People out here know that. Yeah, you're in trouble if you turn me loose. Okay, welcome.
Thank you all so much. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah?
Move it up a
little closer? Okay. Too tall, apparently. How about that?
Good.
Sounds better? Okay. Welcome. That's the first thing. And of course, thanks to all of you for being here. We're glad to see a full room. That's always fun for artists and anyone giving a talk to have somebody to talk to, of course. And then the next thing I wanted to tell you is that we are here tonight, both all of you and all of us, coming in from out of town because of several unique and amazing people and organizations that have made this possible. And so I'm just going to tell you right now, set that tone of gratitude right away, and so I don't forget, because it's a bad habit of mine. So let's see. So first is Nancy Clark. She's right back here, and she was at a concert that we did about 2 years ago. We produced a project called Stories, and there's a CD from that. The music from that project is available over there for $10, and you can take it home. And she heard this concert and said, "Hey, you should come out to Eastern Oregon. You should come out to Wallowa County and do something like this for the people out there." And I said, "Well, yeah, and of course we should." And then it took about 2 years to figure it out, because it, had to get some funding, had to get some people involved, had to figure out what are we going to do, what are we going to talk about. So 2 years later, here we are. Pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
So thank you, Nancy. And then to go on with the story, Nancy kind of started a chain reaction that has led us to tonight. And so I want to thank all of the wonderful people from here at the Josephy Center, of course. Thank you so much. And then with the Wallowa Valley Music Alliance and Fish Trap, of course. So you are all so lucky to have a really rich arts community here. I've been blown away. I think all of us have been kind of blown away just at what we've seen so far, and all the people I've talked to as we've been getting all this organized has just been amazing. So thank you so much to all the people, those organizations, Janice, Shannon, Cheryl, Megan who's here, and Rich. Thank you all so much for helping us make this happen. Thank you. And then of course, we wouldn't be here without the funding of the Oregon Community Foundation. Have been instrumental to this, providing the major support for it, and also the Oregon Historical Society. So thanks so much to those organizations as well. And then, of course, the other person who we wouldn't be here without is with Gwen and Trice. So thank you, Gwen. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know Gwen and know about the work she's doing. And when I first heard about it, a bit from Nancy, and then doing more research on my own, and then finally, when we first talked on the phone, it was just a really exciting to meet her and to hear about what she's up to, and work that I am just amazed by, and I feel is really just important to both the telling of the history of Oregon and knowing who we are here in this state, and having a much more accurate, more clear, more complete picture of what that really means. Who we are, what does it mean, and what are we all doing here? It's just incredibly important to everything that happens. And so I'm just so glad that she's doing it, and thank you so much. And, so, moving on. Let's see, sorry. I want to give you enough context tonight, but not talk you to death before we get to the part where you get to talk to us. I'm the executive director of the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble. We're a 501c nonprofit organization, and our mission is to commission and perform music by Oregon resident composers. And so we've been doing this now for 10 years, which is amazing. I mean, you know how arts organizations are. They can kind of pop up and disappear within a very short amount of time. But we're still here. This is my 4th year as the executive director, and I didn't start the organization. I never would have done such a crazy thing, but I'm thankful to the person who did. And of course, here we all are. So that's us. That's the PJCE. We're a jazz organization, obviously, and you're going to hear some music tonight, of course. But when we think about jazz music, and how do we keep this music growing? How do we continue to make it a vibrant art that's still relevant to everybody who's alive today? We have to think about creative ways to try to achieve that goal, because it's an important one. And so one of the ways we've done that, and there are many ways to do it, but one way that we've done it is to try to connect our music to other conversations that are going on in the culture, right? And so I'm a history buff. I love to read history, and I always get a few books about the history of wherever, the last few places that I've lived, and just to learn more about where I am and try to understand why does the place look the way it does, the way it does now. And so, of course, that history that leads us up to the present is so important, and we wanted to lend the energy of the jazz community to further that goal, right? And there are kind of some other conversations that we've joined in on, and that we're happy to share in that, and so it's a kind of a win-win. We get to win new audiences for jazz, and jazz reaches new people. I mean, that's the same thing, but you know what I mean. So that's why we're here. The last reason that we're here is that normally when, especially when new work is created, like a new piece of music, a new play, a lot of times the artist is working not in secret, but they're certainly working on their own. They're kind of working. They don't want to share every little bit of the piece that's happening as they're creating it. So it's kind of this process where the artist works and works and works and works and works, and then they finally finish the piece, and then the audience hears it, and then you can talk about it. So what we wanted to do is to kind of double that time where the audience can talk about this work. So here we are talking about it at the very beginning of the process. And so all of the artists who are in the room, who we're going to meet in a little bit, they've been thinking a lot about this piece. They've been doing a lot of research. They've been talking to Gwen. They've been talking to people who know about Vanport over in Portland, which we'll tell you a little bit more if you're not familiar. And then we've just been cogitating. We've just been thinking about it. How are we going to do this? It's complicated. We have 6 artists. It's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And so my role is to try to just keep them all working on the same recipe and get to the end. Get to that nice home-cooked meal at the end. So that's what we want to do today. What we want to do is say, you're the people that you actually live here. You live with this story. This happened in your backyard. We want to talk to you about that, and what do you think about it? How do you want to see it portrayed as a piece of music and video and text and music? And so we'll have a few more specific questions for you, and we'll have maybe some things we ask you for feedback. We may also just sit back and listen to you tell us what you want to tell us. Maybe you have questions, maybe you have ideas about things you'd love to hear, or maybe you say, hey, have you heard about this? Have you heard about that? And all of those things would be great to hear. I think the only thing, as far as a ground rules are that we want to have a very honest, open, and respectful conversation. So those are the rules, right? Simple enough. All right. So I think, why don't we go in chronological order, and I'm going to welcome Gwen to come up to the stage. So, Gwen, do you think, I mean, these folks are maybe more familiar, do you think?
I think it would be wonderful to have maybe Marilyn come up and talk about Vanport first.
Great, I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Marilyn, there you are, okay. So this is Marilyn Keller, and Marilyn is one of my most favorite singers out there. She has, you're going to hear, you already heard, but incredible musical skills, an incredible voice, and an incredible interpreter, and an incredible storyteller. Doing work all over the world. I've been hearing about it in the tour van, telling me stories. So I'm very excited for you to all hear a bit about Vanport from Marilyn Keller.
Thank you. My experience with Vanport has been on the other side of history. My family moved to Oregon from New Mexico in 1977, and we moved because my father had a brother who lived in Portland. And as we came up through Portland to Tacoma to visit my eldest sister who was living and married there, she had the first grandchild for my parents. So of course we had to come up to the Northwest to see this wonder baby. And on the way back through, we stopped in Portland for about 3 days to visit my uncle and his family there. And within that 3-day period, he talked my father into moving up to Portland. So back then, it was still, the shipyards were still booming, and the steel industry was still booming. And my father got a job at a chemical plant in Northwest Portland. And we moved into my uncle's house for the first 6 weeks that we were here. My mother was not the kind of woman who wanted to pay rent to anyone. She wanted to own her own home. And so at that time, though we didn't know it, but the residents there, most especially the African American residents there was a thing called redlining going on. And African American families were only offered particular rental and real estate property in a particular portion of Portland, which was north and northeast Portland. Prior to that, in the 1940s, just at the beginning of the Second World War, the first wave of workers that were brought in to work in the Kaiser shipyards, over 40,000 African American families and workers came to Portland on what they call the midnight specials. They got there as best they could to work in the shipyards and in the industry, the board industry back then. And they were housed in a public housing facility that had been hastily built first to stage the soldiers going off and the naval officers going off to war. But then that housing was given over to the workers that were brought in to work in the shipyards. It was known as Vanport. That was a collective of Vancouver and Portland. It was always meant to be a temporary housing project. At its height, Vanport housed 40,000 residents, making it the largest city in Oregon, a home to the workers in Portland shipyards and their families. But as the war ended and peace began, the shipyards were shuttered, and tens of thousands of those workers remained in those houses. They weren't really built to last. They talked about how you could lift the house up off of the concrete stanchions that it was placed on and march it over to another place if you wanted to. But through the housing policies, which were discriminatory, the Portland City Council and the Portland Improvement Societies did not want those particular workers, the African American workers mostly. They were Native Americans living there, Japanese who had returned from the internment camps that they'd been relegated to. There were Russian immigrants that were living there, and some Alaskan natives that were living there. In just a few years, with the neglect and the lack of services that were withheld from Vanport, began to deteriorate. And it went from being an example of wartime industry and housing and cooperation to, there was a mentality about it that it was a crime-laden slum, and it really wasn't. You know, the people that were still living there, they still worked in cooperation with each other. There was a lot less segregationist thought and action in Vanport than there was even in Portland. Portland had been known as a bastion of Ku Klux Klan activities and also for segregation. One of the bands that I sing in, Black Swan, classic jazz band, we do a song called The Dude Ranch, and it tells about a business that actually existed there. It's right across from the Memorial Complex, Memorial Coliseum and Moda Center Complex. It was called the Dude Ranch. And I don't think they were giving horse riding lessons. So that was part of a portion of the city called Black Broadway. And that is where black businesses flourished, and that is where a lot of the black families lived along that corridor there. In the 1960s, was it? The I-5 corridor was built through there. They demolished a lot of housing and displaced a lot of people. Then the Maxville Hospital complex came along in the 1970s. Again, same thing, what they call urban renewal was actually urban removal. A lot of houses were demolished and a lot of families were displaced. And again, that redlining tactic kept them right there in the north and northeast Portland corridor. That was the only place where they could rent or own homes. But they were not given mortgage insurance, they were not given better house insurance or real estate insurance, and loans were not given to the owners to keep their property and their businesses. So it began to deteriorate, and that is how the Portland Housing Authority, and now has become the Housing Authority, is it Portland Development Commission, has used those tactics to regain that housing. They'll condemn it, they'll condemn an entire neighborhood. They've done that, they did that in the 1980s with the crack epidemic that came through north to northeast Portland. And the police acquisition tactics that if someone living in that house had anything to do with drugs, the entire household was condemned. And all of the property and everything else was confiscated. And they had something called a drug-free zone, where if you had been convicted of any kind of drug offenses, you could not return to that neighborhood to live or to work. So Vanport, being the repository of the workers that had been actually moved in there on the auspices of, is it Henry Kaiser? It became the I should say the stepchild of Portland. Over 40,000 people lived there at one time. And by the time a calamitous disaster happened in 1948, only 20,000 people lived there. In a city that before the war claimed fewer than black residents, white Portland eyed Vanport suspiciously. And if those few years of the 23,000 inhabitants, only slightly 4,000 were colored residents. There was a high percentage of per capita compared to other northwestern cities, but as one resident put it, the colored people have to live somewhere, and whether the Northwesterners liked it or not, they were here to stay. So basically with an increasingly dilapidated town, the Housing Authority of Portland wanted to dismantle Vanport altogether. The consensus of opinion was that as long as over 20,000 people could find another place to go, Vanport would continue to operate, whether Portland liked it or not. It was impossible to throw 20,000 people out of housing at one time. But the city would learn that it wasn't completely impossible. The place where Vanport was located is now known as Delta Park. And it's a complex of athletic fields. It's spread across 85 acres, has some nature preserves, and it is home to Portland's International Raceway right now. It was open, it was green and vibrant, and it made Portland and Vanport an attractive place to call home. You know, Portland was named one of the world's most livable cities, only to lose that that mantle once and for all for a second. When calamity did happen, it was in the form of a flood that took place after an earthen dam on the Columbia River broke and sent, was it a 40-foot wall of water downriver. Within an hour and a half, Vanport was flooded. And all of those people, on May 25th, 1948, the Columbia and the Malanga rivers had reached a flood stage of 23 feet above flood level. And they began patrolling the dikes, but they didn't issue any warnings to Vanport's residents. They caught them all by surprise. The numbers say that only 15 people died, but at the end, the next census found that over 300 people were missing from that census. So the housing authority actually safeguarded its files and equipment and moved them from their offices in Vanport, along with 600 horses from the adjacent racetrack there. They woke up to the people in Vanport woke up to a flyer from the housing authority that read, "Remember, dikes are safe at present. You will be warned if necessary. You will have time to leave. Don't get excited." The dikes didn't hold. At 4:17 p.m., a break came in a railroad dike that separated Vanport from Smith Lake along the city's northwest edge. What began as a small hole, just 6 feet initially, rapidly expanded until water was steadily streaming through a 500-foot gap in the dike. As water seeped into the city, homes were swept away because they weren't anchored. They were just sitting there on the stanchions. Their walls were unable to withstand the force of the water. It wasn't the housing authority or even city police that first alerted residents to the incoming flood, but students and faculty from Vanport College, which also became Portland State University, one of our largest university systems in the state. Students and faculty from Vanport College who had come to Vanport to collect and secure their research projects. The Columbia Slough, which runs along the southern edge of the Columbia River, succeeded in absorbing some of the incoming water, but within 10 minutes, Vanport was inundated. In less than a day, the nation's largest housing project and Oregon's second largest city was destroyed. 18,500 residents were displaced and roughly 6,300 were black. There were rumors in the local press after the flood. Official estimates of casualties were given out to reporters by those not directly involved with the investigation were in the hundreds, and eyewitness accounts told stories of dozens of bodies being carried down the Columbia River. Days into June, no bodies had been recovered from the flooded town. And there were rumors that the housing authority had disposed of bodies in order to lessen the blame for its mishandling of the situation. Ed Washington, who's been a part of this presentation, was quoted, "If it had been a totally white population living there, would it have been different?" Probably. If they had been poor white people, would it have been different? Probably not. Discriminatory practices, housing practices, and redlining practices have been the bane of existence for people of color since emancipation. People have a need of secure, safe, and affordable housing. And when you have a situation like this, when people are kept in basically an unsafe area, and then not given the information that they need to secure themselves and their families and their valuables, it is morally and criminally unethical. And I think the story that we're shaping to tell you, it has been told many times, and is working right now in the form of a festival called the Vanport Mosaic Festival that takes place in May of every year. You can go online to vanportmosaic.org and find out more information, come over to Portland. You will see video stories that have been gathered and midwifed by our friend Loforti, who's also part of this gathering. And you will also get to meet survivors of the Vanport flood. You will be able to go and take tours of the area where Vanport used to exist. And you will also see people who are trying very, very hard not to let their contribution to not only the war effort, but their contribution to the city of Portland and the state of Oregon be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. All right. So now it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Gwen Trice. And she'll tell you about Maxville. I think you're probably a little bit more familiar with that, perhaps than Vanport, but and thanks to her work. I've been so happy to be here. That's all I'll say. Here you go, Gwen.
How's that work?
Good.
All right. Thank you. This is a privilege. It's an honor to be here at this creative group. They're teaching me a great deal about a different way to do process. Heart, body, and soul in putting all of this work together. Vanport has been a mystery to me, and I didn't know a lot about it when I started this program. I did a conference, actually I did a talk, a presentation. We did the Logger's Daughter, and the folks were so excited when I came. They're like, okay, you're gonna come and you're gonna be at a treatment plant where Vanport used to be. And I thought, well, that's weird. First of all, I didn't know anything about Vanport, and I thought, well, why a treatment plant? And as I came and talked to the folks there and hearing the lush and green of it, I saw those pieces without any, I couldn't put it in context of what happened during that time. And what I saw, though, when I talked to the folks that work there and live in that area, is there is a great love, like we have in our area, of history, of their own history. And people are moved, and there were a lot of tears during that presentation for what was lost, and frustration for maybe not knowing a lot about this history in Oregon. That's based in a lot of racism, and I said the R word, so now we don't have to worry and think about that so much. And so eloquent that you Marilyn, put the words. It's very difficult, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about, is difficult history, and what does that look like, and what are we doing around that. So I'm the founder and the executive director of the Maxville Heritage Interpretive Center, and we're just located a couple of blocks down the street. We're in the heart of the Arts and Cultural Center of Josephy, Oregon. What a welcome we got when we moved into that space from the community, and a lot of visitors from all over the world have come and just said, wait a minute, black loggers? I've never heard of that. And the thing is I hadn't heard of it either until 2003, when I started doing some other work and coming back home, working with the Nez Perce Indian, and doing a lot of volunteer work, sitting with the elders and talking about it, and really just trying to figure out, what do I want to be when I grow up? Being in school, and my son in college at the same time, and really just trying to figure it out. And when the folks around here said, you know, you ought to go up to that promise reunion. Your people are from up there. And I thought, well, first of all, I don't know you very well. What do you know about my people? And that really opened a lot of doors for me. As you begin to ask those questions, is what does that look like? And I appreciate the introduction from Douglas. It's work you don't do alone. It takes a community to do that work. And I just want to recognize a couple of people that are in the audience. Do I have board members here today? Chuck? Bill? Thank you. And a former board member, Pearl Marsh. Anyone else? There's a lot of folks that have volunteered. How many people have volunteered in one way or another for Maxville Heritage and Tourism? Just look around you, of the folks. Come on, don't be shy. There's a lot of you that have done one thing or another. And one of the ways that we volunteer for each other is just by that encouragement of we believe in the work that you're doing. When I first came here and started talking to local folks about the idea of loggers that weren't Paul Bunyan. So think about Paul Bunyan. Yeah, does everyone know the story of Paul Bunyan, right? And does everyone know how the story started? He's a tall tale. How he got to be a tall tale? He showed up during a nor'easter on the shores of Maine. Who else was found at the shore of a body of water that we all know of in history? So, Moses? We know who Moses' parents were. We didn't know who Paul was. But they talked a lot about clear-cutting the land and doing all of this work. The fact is, there were many people of color involved in the logging industry from the beginning, and we're not in the books. And for me, that was galvanizing. It was so important to be able to tell an inclusive story. And it's an American story. Am I right? Through the lens of all of us, and what does that look like? And this journey has been about that. And it's talking about all of us in that place. So for this project, it is Maxville to Vanport. So who did we know that maybe that was at Maxville and that made that journey? And that's a fairly new discovery because the work has been so expansive in what we've been looking at, what we've been talking about. And we have been doing a lot of interviews with folks that we found African American folks that came. Actually, the one that we're working on specifically, because I've got a list of names and we're beginning at the beginning, is a woman that is very a friend of Marilyn, who has been singing with her every Saturday for years. And I reached out to her. That her, Diane, her mom was my mom's best friend when my mom came to live around, 10 years older than her. And I started talking with Diane and asking questions about this connection, this Maxville to Vanport. Would it have really happened? And really, this is this story of migration, that people move because they want a better life for multiple reasons. They want for our kids, for our families. Maybe there's just so many scenarios that are about that. And so we've been talking about what that looks like, that's connection, Vanport, Maxville. So this woman, her name is Marion, she got a call from this area that said, you ought to come out to this area. Come out and be a part of it. Well, she lived in New York at the time. And she went from New York to Maxville. And married a logger there. She had one child through that marriage, and she ended up moving to La Grande, where she went to the Board Memorial Baptist Church, and that was the black church in LeGrand where I grew up in that church. And that marriage didn't last, and she ended up marrying another gentleman, Maxville Lager, and had 2 more daughters. And she started, really, I like, here's my phrases, she was saved. She got saved at that place. And she really fell in love with the church and with the possibilities, and with the area as well. And she began to teach Vacation Bible School to the kids in LeGrand, Pendleton, Hermiston, Twin Falls, Idaho, all Pasco. She started going to these places, and there's other information. Again, what Douglas said is I'm not giving you all the nuggets. It's a growing story, and isn't that wonderful that our history has an opportunity to grow and become more accurate based on documentation, based on primary and secondary hybrid information, that we can actually connect those dots together. And to be able to reach out to those places and ask, were the loggers there? Who was in those spaces? And from LeGrand, and a lot of the parents, a lot of the women actually, after a period of time in Maxville, because we were at Maxville earlier today, and it was a little chilly. They ended up moving to LeGrand, so the women and the children moved there, because Maxville was a segregated town. It had an African American side and a white side. In fact, it was very typical of company towns, whether you were a logging town or even in coal mining. A lot of those big businesses felt that it was much more efficient to segregate every nationality or ethnicity by their job. And in certain areas, in fact, they got so specific with it. If you were a single male and you were white, all the single males were separated from the married families. So it was really a part of this mindset of how do we make money, move the millions of board feet out of these spaces. This town of Maxville was run by the Bowman Hicks Lumber Company, who hired local people to find this area. And they found an area right outside of Bishop Meadow, this beautiful space. And right near there was Camp Number 5, which was a very large camp in this county. And when they brought and bought that space from local folks, they brought in the people from Camp Number 5, which made it bigger. And they brought in African American loggers. So my father, and I know that one of Pearl's relatives, I call him Pa Pat. So every time I think of his proper name, I think of Pa Pat, but his name was Joe Patterson. They came in the first group of people, a group of men, because the men came first. And men came first from, it didn't matter what area, whether you were white or black, but the men came first in an established space, and the families came. And the rest of the people from those groups came into that space and settled into that area. What made it easier for them to set up Maxville in a way that was segregated, and you'll find that there are other towns in the state that are logging towns, and they had different quarters. So Vernonia, has anyone heard of Vernonia? So Vernonia had a black quarter, a Filipino quarter, and a Japanese quarter. And it was again part of that separation. So they had 2 schools there. They brought in the families, and they brought in a lot of Southern folks. And so the social norm was segregation. And so there was not a difference of, you're not going to say much. It was 1923 to 1933 of that town's existence. So it wasn't very long, but it was established very quickly, and they moved a lot of millions of board feet out of that area. So I want to give you some of the background, and I don't want to take up a lot of the time in the story, because I think it's so important, again, I see a lot of you in the room that have different background and different history of telling the story from your perspective, and I want to be able to hear from all of you. I want to give you just a sense of the framework of what it might have been at Maxville during the day, and the work that we're doing to dig and further understand more of the people that are there. There is so much that's going on, and I could talk for like 2 hours. We're not doing that tonight. Thank you for that. But I do want to really think about that connection of migration and movement, and what connects us, what makes us similar instead of what makes us different. And what we're finding is it's a lot of the music. We're discovering the music that my father created and the bands that he brought into town through the stories of Diane, through the stories of Marilyn that's going to share with us, and with Renee that helps to interpret it with her wonderful, wonderful art. And I just want to open up your hearts and your minds, and I want to ask that you make this an amnesty moment, a safe place for each and every one of us to begin to have those conversations and go deep. And just so I celebrate every one of you this evening.
All right, so next in our program, Marilyn, Keller, and Ezra Weiss are going to perform a song for you called "What Do Your Trees Tell You?" And while they migrate up to the stage here, I need to get this thing out. I'm going to migrate this thing. Everything's all right, I promise. Speaking of migration, you might be wondering how is this connected to jazz? And there is actually a very important connection. And one of the themes that Gwen mentioned that has come up over and over again is of migration. And I'll give you the 5-second history of jazz, and that is that so jazz began as a very local music. It was created in New Orleans, in a particular neighborhood in New Orleans, by African American musicians. And then that was around the turn of the century, as kind of in that period up until World War I, it kind of coalesced into becoming this unique, distinctive music called jazz. World War I begins, and the Great Migration begins. And so that's when jazz music left New Orleans as the musicians migrated as part of the Great Migration. Excuse me, I'm a little nervous. So, yeah, right? Yeah, is that heavy? Maybe a disaster over here. So this is a song with lyrics by Renee Mitchell, who's right back here. Some of you might have heard her. Heard her read last night at Fish Trap Fireside. That was an amazing event. I couldn't believe it. I mean, the room was packed. We could barely fit in. We were like standing in the back of the room like this. And so we were so happy to, thanks for having Renee as a part of that, and we really enjoyed it. So lyrics by Renee Mitchell and music by Ezra Weiss, who's sitting at the piano right now, and Marilyn Keller. Take it away, guys. Thank you.
not the same. Branches stretched to give life, been used to take life too. Our nature reveals what nature is purpose to do. What do your trees tell you? Huh? What do your trees tell you? Huh? What do your trees tell you? Huh? What do your trees tell you? Mississippi, home of fatback and fried okra, fields of white cotton, brown hands bowed head. Born there, don't wanna die there, leastways not before my time. But at times, quite frankly, that choice not be mine. The trunks of trees, they call my name, but the whisperings are not the same. Escape to an oasis called Oregon by chasing opportunity. Brought my Delta music, ways and women, established a new community. Brought for our skills to help timber thrive, escaping southern trees, found northern trees, best way to keep my family alive. see death, some opportunity. A change in perspective does a man's heart good, makes all the difference to what we believe. The trunks of trees, they call my name. Oh, but the whisperings are not the same. Branches stretch to give life, been used to take life too. Our nature reveals what nature is purpose to do. From Mississippi to Maxville, from hanging up to cutting down, life's discovered amongst the branches that speak to journeys profound. What do your trees tell you? 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 That's very affecting. We're going to set up the room right now.
So come on up, artists. Creative team, historians. Thank you so much, guys. So that is that's what we're up to. So we are taking these stories, we're trying to get to the bottom of them and bring all of them together into a new piece of music. And we're going to be coming back here to perform at the OK Theater in April. It's going to be April 13th. We're really excited, and it's just going to be a great time. So, and the day before, April 12th, we're going to be playing for students. So we're going to try to fill up the whole theater with as many students as we can get bused to that location, and then share that music with them. The next night we'll play it for everybody else who wants to be there. We'd love for you all to be there. And also, of course, you can, there's an email list to sign up over on the table over there by the door. So if you'd like to hear from us by email, go ahead and put your address on there. Are we all up here, guys? We also want to welcome our moderator up here, and he's just going to kind of help us make sure we include lots of voices and. So this is the time we want to hear from you. So now you have a really good idea, a lot of context. You've heard some of the music, and we wanted to kind of create this opportunity for us, for this group of artists. They're all the ones that are going to be making the piece. This is a piece that's going to be around, right? It's going to be kind of a record of it's not a historical record, it's an artistic, homage to the history, right? And so it's gonna be around. It's gonna be around for future Oregonians. How do you want this story to be portrayed? That's what we want to know, and that's what we'd like to hear. And also, I want to encourage artists. If any of you have any specific questions that you wanted to ask to get feedback on, please do so. We're not going to be too directive, but I think I'll take it away.
And then, we're going to run that way.
Oh, right, okay.
Welcome, everybody. Wow, I still feel that like right here. That was like very much in the solar plexus, and your hair kind of standing up a little bit. It was beautiful. It was very, very wonderful. I feel very thankful to be here this evening. And being here and hearing something that Gwen said reminded me earlier this year there was a formal dedication of the Longhouse in Wallowa at the Homeland Project. And I had been wanting to go to the Longhouse for a long time, but I had never made it to any of the events that were happening. And so when the dedication of the Longhouse happened, I actually made it down there. And one of the things that was so special about being in that space was the man who was leading the washout ceremony for the dedication of the Longhouse said to all of us who were there, each one of you has brought something to this space. Each one of you is contributing to what we're sharing and making this possible. And I feel like this is the same kind of space. So we have one opportunity this evening to share as many of our feelings and stories and thoughts and ideas and responses. And there are a lot of you in the room. So I just want to encourage each of you to think of yourself as a part of this story, to think of yourselves as a part of where we are here together tonight. And Chuck is going to help me out by keeping an eye out for folks who would like to share something or have a question to ask about the process, about where people are coming from. And all of you, I think we haven't really talked about how we want to do this, but if at some point I will ask you guys if you have responses or questions that you want to ask as well. So it's a weird shaped room. I think if you wiggle, or you can say Sarah, my name is Sarah, raise your hand, stick your foot out, something, and we'll make sure to get you a mic so everyone can hear what you have to share.
I was just wondering if you could get, we know some of the people up here, but if you want to introduce themselves here.
Sure.
Give a little background.
Sure.
Yeah, my name is Kalima Abioto. I'm a filmmaker, video artist, and I'll be kind of creating an installation for the performance of the jazz and poetry pieces.
Could you say
during
that,
the,
please?
yes? Oh, sure. Yeah, my name is Kalima Abioto. Okay. Yeah, I'm a filmmaker, video artist from Memphis, Tennessee. I'll be creating kind of a video installation story to accompany the jazz and poetry performance. So, yeah. Thanks for having us.
Good evening. My name is Renee Mitchell. I am a creative revolutionist. I write lyrics and plays and poetry, and almost everything else that has a written word. I do. Glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
I'm Ezra Weiss, and I'm a composer and sometimes pianist. And I get to have the honor of writing the music to accompany the words of Renee and the video of Kalima for the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble, which I don't know if we've mentioned, but it's actually more than just piano. It is a 12-piece ensemble, almost the size of a big band. So in the back of your head, this is kind of like the demo version of it. So come back in the spring. It's going to be bigger and longer.
My name is Marilyn Keller. I call myself a vocal instrument. Thank you. My nickname is The Pipes, and you can find me all over YouTube, Facebook. I have a website, MarilynTKeller.com. But I was invited upon this project through the auspices of Douglas Dietrich. We met face to face for the first time at a production of Ain't Misbehavin' in Portland, and I was there to create the talkback segment after the stage play ended. And as we shared that day, Doug mentioned that he wanted to have me become a part of a project, some project that PJCE would be doing in the future. That was 3 years ago. And so this has been a seed that was rooted and grounded and has received a lot of fertility, thought and heart and actual, the guts, the visceral guts of the people that have been involved in this. And it's germinating, it's growing. We're starting to see the first sprouts and the leaves of the tree that this project will become. And we hope that it will be a project that will bring people together, and it will open minds and hearts. If you have even the slightest impulse tonight of a thought, please share it with us, because as I said, we are germinating a seed. We're growing something really big here, and I'm not going to stop this process until we actually have the utopian society that the United States and the world is supposed to be. You know, I'm not going to be happy until I'm on a spaceship somewhere outside the envelope, you know. And this is where it starts, where people begin to have ideas and share their hearts and their minds and their souls with each other. And the more you know about the other, the closer you become to being the one. So share yourselves with us as we share ourselves with you. Thank you.
Sika is back there with cameras. She's making a documentary film about our process. We're not supposed to acknowledge her in the film. It's like, she's back there. And
That's Miss Sika Stanton, everyone.
So with that wonderful reminder and invitation, who would like to share a seed?
Stand up too? Hi. Well, thank you very much. I'm so proud of this production. My family came to Maxville in the 30s, and even though they closed the post office in 33, people didn't leave until 45. That's when my family left, because the kids had to come down and go to school. And what I would share with you all is that Vanport is a tragic story on the tail end of it, but like Vanport, Maxville was an opportunity for people to break bonds with the Jim Crow South. And so the people who came from the Jim Crow South to Maxville, it was actually a moment of liberation. And the town itself was segregated. I'm sorry, the Maxville was segregated, the camp. But Bowman Hicks' superintendent, old man, what's his name? Old Man Ashby, they called him. Old Man Ashby did not segregate the town in terms of its amenities. So all of the amenities were open to everybody. Everybody made friends. The women, cooked and sewed and suffered through the hardships of those winters with their families. The men worked together in the woods, and it was quite a place. I have done a lot of research on this as well. And if you read the old newspapers, you'll see Bob Baggett, who was a black guy, and Hafer, who was a white guy, slaughtered a pig today and took it into town. I have to say, I still see those kind of stories in the Chieftain. I keep the Chieftain online. So sprinkled throughout all of the newspapers are stories about real community. And I want to say that racism is the backdrop to all this stuff. I mean, it's 2017. But for our families that came up, it was new space. They played baseball, they had the segregated teams, but if they had to go to Elgin to play and they needed to put together a good team, then they put the blacks and whites together. In fact, in 41, Wallowa fielded an integrated team. And the first team they played were the Promised Landers, and they beat them. But I just want to say that my mother and grandmother and aunties and all their white friends, they cooked, they cleaned, they sewed, they quilted, they embroidered. They did all that together, and the men did. My dad and all the men went up to the pool hall. It wasn't segregated. So I would hope the story that I want to get portrayed out of Maxville is that it really wasn't Portland. I'll finish with this. I've been interviewing descendants. There are about 15 of us first-generation descendants still living. And I just interviewed one of the Andersons yesterday. They came in 30. And she said they didn't know racism until they got to Portland. And Portland was a nightmare. So I'll be in and out of Wallowa. I come and go over the year. And I want to share that story and keep sharing it, that this was a great place for us. My brothers graduated high school. Jim Puckett is here. He beat my brother in track.
Mr. Puckett is my old track coach. He's my son too.
I'll tell you. Because of Mr. Puckett, I got a scholarship to Mountain Community College, a full-ride scholarship. And halfway through my years there, he and my other coach, Ernie Smith, got my money commuted from the athletics department to the performing arts department so I could stay in school. And that is one of the reasons why I'm standing here today to see him.
I'll end with this. It takes a whole lot for us to conceive that a white kid could beat us in sports, really, But even over in La Grande, there was a really fast guy, one of the miners. And when I interviewed him, he said, boy, that puppy could run. So, hey, Jim. Oh, I'm Pearl Alice Marsh. And my grandparents, hi. My grandparents were Mom, Pop, Pat. You're in Josephy, you probably didn't know them, but they were iconic down there in Wallowa. And my father was Amos and my mother was Mary. And my brothers were Amos and Frank.
Thank you so much.
One thing I forgot to mention is that, there's a lot of us here and we want to hear as many voices as possible, but you can have a follow-up conversation. You can reach out to anyone in the project and continue your story beyond tonight. So I know some of you probably have a lot to share. Other folks who want to voice?
Hey, I'm Cam. This is just more of a question. I loved the fireside last night, thank you. And the lyrics, the trunks of trees call my name. And all the history of tie-ins. And I guess my question is for Marilyn and Renee and Gwen and Kalima and other storytellers in your group. Are there other things besides trees that are starting to pop up for you? And if so, what are they?
Yes, so baseball. I'll take back. And it will connect to maybe some of the folks that are in the room today. Is
Since I've been on my journey coming back home and being in the space over the last 10 years, we were talking about, you know, what do the trunks of trees tell us? They take life, and we get that. And they nurture us in so many ways. And we, as we're walking through, we're talking about the nutrients that are extracted from the trees, the cambium layer that comes out, and for the tribes locally. So is there anyone in the audience today that can speak to the cambium layer and that journey of our Nez Perce brothers and sisters that have been here before us?
Rich?
I'm loud.
Stand up.
So there were a lot of American Indians involved in jazz and in dance bands in the 20s. And there was a group called the Nez Perceans from Lapwai, and they came up to Wallowa County. Okay? Chief White, what was it? Chief White singing his Redskins or something like that. It was like, I mean, he had a headdress on. There was a picture down at Fish Trap for a while. Anyway, so, and a lot of those guys brought instruments back from Carlisle Indian School. And played in dance bands. I wrote a blog about it, and I got replies. There were Indian dance bands all over the place. And I'm just wondering what kind of interaction there might have been there. There was interaction on the baseball field, as Pearl mentioned. I think in 39, when the Indians came up here and built, they had a CCC camp, and they built the wall up at the lake. And they played baseball. I think they might have played Maxville then. But that would be a comment, but I wondered if there was anything on music.
She was asking about the cambium peeled trees.
I know.
Can you tell us anything about that?
No!
Do you have any connection with that group still?
Pardon?
Do you have any connection with that group, or are any of them still alive?
I don't know, but we can find out. I don't think so. There's 20s, but there are children that are alive. Okay?
That would be a connection.
Yeah, we can find someone.
Oh, cool.
Gwen just asked me to say something because she knows I'm a nerd about this stuff, but I really am not the expert to be speaking about the cambium trees, but specifically there are many old ponderosa pines in the northern forests that were the inner cambium layer of the ponderosa bark was harvested by the Nez Perce tribe. For food products, they made, as I understand it, kind of a sweetener out of it, a sap, and as well as fiber. You can make great fiber material out of the inner cambium layers of the ponderosa pine. So if you travel through the northern forests, you'll see these scars on these ancient 200-plus-year-old ponderosa pines that are still healthy and alive, growing magnificently. And these scars were carved out by people in Chief Joseph's time and even prior to that. And you can put your hand on this scar in the trunk of the ponderosa pines, and it's pretty incredible. I work for the Forest Service and lead some fourth grade field trips out there, and that's something I have the kids do, is just put their hand. Some of the trees you can actually see the marks from the blades that they were using to carve the cambium out. And I have the kids just put their hand on the tree right there and tell them that Chief Joseph could have had his own hand sitting in that same scar on that tree. So if you're out there wandering around by Buckhorn, there's a place called Indian Village Grove. We don't mark it with signs. The tribe has asked not to draw too much attention to it because we know things can happen when a lot of people start going to these historic sites. But it's out there near Buckhorn Lookout. And it's not just in this location. Once you see what these scars look like, you'll start seeing them all over the forest. And it's not just here in Wallowa County, it's anywhere these big ponderosa pines grow. Recently, I've been involved in a little bit of research. There's also some trail marker trees out there that were bent and shaped in specific shapes. There's not a lot known or that has been shared about what exactly they mean, but trees are living history. We have trees in Wallowa County that are 3,000 years old. And these ponderosa pines out north, average, 200 years old. So Chief Joseph, many people before him could have ridden right underneath these same branches, the same branches the people of Maxville were working under. And so this history, we're here today, and it spans back to the last glacier that melted out of Wild Lake. So just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Joe. And I've been to Indian Village, and I have pictures of I'm not just pressing my hand, but putting my hand all the way in to the wrist of the cambium layer, and those trees are thriving. So a way to be able to get nurtured and to have everything survive for years and years.
It's a living
generations.
history.
It is a living history. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks.
Other voices people want to share?
Well, I do want to get back to this gentleman's original question about beyond trees and that kind of thing. What are the things that we're thinking about? Well, I think that is the reason that we are here, is to hear, and me in particular, to absorb the themes and the stories of what you would like to talk about, and then to be able to give that back to you. So maybe at some point toward the end, I could probably answer that question about what are we thinking about beyond trees. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
And I had something else. One was that as we were moving around out in the township today, the area of the township, we were shown a place where the main business office had been dismantled and is now in storage and waiting for reassembly in the event of a purchase of land parcels. Do you still have to do that? But we also talked about what it might have been like for the women of the township. It's a hard life. That was a hard life. They were not hired to come as loggers. They came as family members, or they were, I don't know if they still did mail order brides then, but that was a tough life. My mother and my father grew up in rural southern central Louisiana, and they didn't have indoor plumbing for a long time. And you think about what these citizens saw as the times changed. They did use a lot of advanced technique to log and to transport. They had the spur go up there. They could get the material back down the mountain that way. But the women had to use ingenuity. They had to use just personal grit. These were the true grit holders there. So we want to explore what their life might have been like too, and what the home life might have been. We were shown several of the structures that were brought down and that still exist here within, is it Enterprise?
The town of Balala.
The town of Balala, where we were. I mean, they were worse than the shotgun houses that my parents, ended up growing up in Louisiana. I can't imagine being in this weather system in a house where the walls are that thin, you could probably see through them. And I think they used newspaper and probably tar paper inside to line them. They had wood stove, they had to go out and tote water in, and they had to learn, ways of cooking. And what did you say? How many calories per day did
6,000 calories per day.
6,000 calories. So imagine the amount of food that you had to gather, prepare, and serve each day. That's a lot of food. My mom cooked for 11 kids and her parents. She started cooking when she was 10 or 11 years old, and she cooked the rest of her life. She learned how to make tasty food, institutional size. We had to fight for her food at church potlucks and community dinners. People recognized her pots and pans. And so, I understand the process, but you have to have the knowledge base to know how much you're going to need to prepare for how many people. And that is a genius that needs to be explored too.
And I know what she's talking about because my husband's done a lot of manual labor, but when he worked as a horse logger, I had to send twice as much food with him.
I don't mean to, I won't talk after this. First of all, I'd really like to maybe talk to you individually because I know what it's like to wash on a scrub board and all that work that my mom did to patch jeans. I can patch jeans. And you want to talk about hard work. You clean some chitlins when you don't have indoor water, indoor plumbing. They had to clean the chitlins using pumps.
Or fish,
Huh?
gut and scale fish.
Oh yeah, I did. One thing that I would add, because I've come from labor, is that the bosses are missing. If you look at both Vanport and Maxville, the bosses brought these workers out. And in both instances, they didn't care who they were bringing out, they wanted to get the job done. So Kaiser brought immigrants, African Americans, everybody up there. In Maxville, Bowman Hicks and Old Man Ashby brought black workers out. So the bosses need to be, well, I would suggest that the bosses be included.
Is there anyone here that has any connection to Bowman Hicks or to the upper echelon of the logging company?
So Bowman Hicks dissolved not much longer after that. And
After they left?
Yeah, and a lot of we have folks in the county here who are railroad enthusiasts. There's another word we call them bummers because they're so excited. But part of that is they have been picking up a lot of the information about Bowman Hicks on eBay, a lot of places because the information was sold out to everyone. And so as they pick up and pull information from that company, they make that available. And so we are able to bring that back out. And really, a lot of our family really were. I mean, it's not different where you come from in this community. We hunt. Today's the start of elk season, right? So we hunt. My dad had a walk-in meat locker built on the side of our house, and we were woken every, whether it be morning or evening, all the kids were awakened, and everyone's a part of that process of processing your meat and your foods, hunter-gatherer processing, and if you're little, then maybe you're plucking ducks or whatever. I just pulled a chucker casserole out of the oven tonight before I came here. So really, this is a part of this community's culture. Oh, chucker is a small game bird that's absolutely fabulous. I know, it is delicious.
Just one second. Ashby's granddaughter is around, and he was the guy who came out and organized it, so I could put you in touch with Gail Feinberg.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in knowing about the milestone experiences of almost any place. Marriages, births, deaths, dances, that sort of thing.
So was that information kept, the genealogy and the...
Well, I know that as I've been talking with Diane, her mom had, we pulled out the birth and death certificate, and her Bible, she wrote all of the marriages and the live births and everyone that was a part of it, including those kids that were actually brought in from other families that they helped to raise. So yes, I tried to back all of that up with that kind. If I can get that, and not everyone had it, and a lot of the African American folks didn't have pictures, and so a lot of times we're included in some pictures, but that's not been prevalent as much. But talking to this community, the elders in this community have filled in a lot of that background, and a lot of those transcripts are available.
We mentioned on the way over here how we'd like to tie in the familial background of the descendants of those in Maxville. We may have to do it like an African village, the griot, and maybe do like the genealogy in the Bible, and Obed begat Jesse and Jesse begat David, you know, things like that. It's kind of like we could use, remember how at the Oregon Historical Society, Renee, people were asking them, saying, we want to hear more blues, we want to hear, you know, we want to hear some of the other styles of music that were born in the African American diaspora. That could be like maybe a vocal, you know, recitative.
One of the discoveries we had in our interview with Diane is we were talking about her mom and the loggers and the family, because after her mom went to Vanport, her last logger husband married a woman that was in our churches. And so for us, churches are super important. It's a way, you know, especially when people were traveling, if there was no place to stay, you know, you connect with the churches. And that was a big part of that. And I didn't find out till later that all of these folks that were in the church I grew up in were all from those descendants, the loggers' descendants. And from that, she goes, oh, you know, and I loved it because your dad always played the piano. In fact, and she turned around, and in her house was the piano from Frank, that was the father. And she turned around and she goes, this is what your dad taught me. She started playing this old ragtime song. And I know that my dad had created a 78. He played the piano. He played the snare drums. I had to do it first before I could say it. And there were several songs that were identified in the music of the folks that were coming in, and some of the images. You know, we had a guy on an engine at Maxville, and he's in there's some wonderful things. This is another exhibit that's coming up that's starting at the beginning of the year at the state capitol, but he's playing a mandolin. And know that there were many Greek loggers, not just in Maxville, but in this region, and there's a cemetery just outside of La Grande that's only the men, because they didn't bring their women. They sent them the money back home, but they had just, you know, they didn't have descendants in their families. But it's the, you know, what did they play? What kind of instruments did they play when they were there? What kind of music did they have? And the generations that came. So my father, he would be 114, 115 if he were living today. My mom's just turned 91 this last month. Or excuse me, in September. It's just, the years keep flying on. Yikes. But it's that sense of what things did they come together. A really dear friend, and the person that really started me on this journey, Orvella Hafer, just passed. And she just finished her second book of the history of the North Country where we live. And I know that we both have, Pearl and I both have articles in some of the literature there, but they talk about, you know, how they came together, as you know, and that first time that Orvella saw the Charleston was on the 4th of July, which was their holiday that a lot of folks came together, and she says, I remember this little black girl, and she was moving her legs so fast in her hands that she says we couldn't hardly even keep up, and we, you know, they didn't travel far from being in that area, and so that was how they got the history and what was happening around the nation is through that. So it's so rich, so many things, and the church is really, it's that through line, I think, in a lot of ways.
One other connection to there I want to mention, that in Portland I learned a little while ago, in the same process when I met Marilyn, but one of the ways that jazz music, kind of the newest recordings in jazz music, would come to Portland over the railroad. In Portland, one of the most common jobs, and one of the few jobs that a black man could hold in Portland, was with the railroads, being a porter on the railroads. When they went back east, they would they would get some records and bring them back, and that was weeks before any of the record stores would have them. And so that was one way.
Can you stand up and kind of come so that you can see folks, because they don't want to talk to you around the corner.
I've been listening to them around the corner all day.
Well, now's your chance. Now's your chance to see you.
Hi. How you
ago, and I wouldn't say my grandfather was one of the bosses at Bait Company, but I think, if I remember right, it could have been, not Bait, but Bowman Hicks. I know they had records. He was a log buyer, and unfortunately, a lot of the timber scaling and stuff got disposed of when he passed away. But my dad told me stories about, you're talking about the 6,000 calorie diet, and they talked about eating, biscuits with just thick slabs of lard on it to keep the calories and energy going. And I know my dad told a story I wish I could remember better, about hauling some of the buildings back from Maxville into town. And, my Uncle Jack might have more memories and stories about that. Or some of my siblings might have heard more from my dad. And the other thing, I really loved that Trunks of Trees song, because I'm really interested in sustainable forestry in the future. My grandfather came from a logging background, but my dad was really a proponent of sustainable forestry and growing old trees, because old trees grow a lot more volume per tree, and so they have a healthy forest, for the future and can fight climate change.
That's awesome. That, next steps.
Yeah.
Please connect with us and share that information with us.
I think Gwen knows how to find us.
Okay.
And I think Pearl does too.
We're gonna need it.
And I've been through I've walked, I've had the privilege of walking Marilyn, walking through the space, the sustainable space that you guys have, and it's just amazing. And really that's what we need to be thoughtful about, is we're talking about the past, but the past informs where we're going. And we're really thoughtful about what that looks like. So thank you for, allowing us to come in, not at will, but just, keeping it open and keeping us knowledgeable. I so appreciate what you've done.
Sarah, Daryl, I can't reach you.
No, thank you. I can't stay super long. We have a 4-year-old who's kind of recover from a cough. Hey, Gwen. But we just wanted to say, well, now our relationship is growing through the use of the theater, which is great, because we own the OK Theater, most people know. And we're really excited about this show coming in April. And I've been working with Douglas on this. I know I've been slow on some of the emails, but he's been excellent to work with. But I've been we've been helping with Maxville for 8 years, I think.
At least.
Yeah, and we started going out when it was all the way out in Promise. And our relationship started kind of more as a musician. I'm a musician as well. And my interests have been, from the time I started playing the guitar, I was really drawn to, through my study of I wanted to learn about the electric guitar. It was kind of really head start with acoustic guitar. But, so I did my first science fair, well not my first science fair, but my science fair when I started playing guitar was on the electric guitar. And you don't study electric guitar very long before you're learning about Muddy Waters and these wonderful musicians. And that music, though I grew up around in a family of musicians and country music, to me, it was a really revolutionary thing. Chuck Berry, and I just got to practicing all those licks. I really love that stuff. Started saving and bought my first electric guitar. So that stayed with me, but so I went through this whole phase through high school of, technicality and the rock music and heavy metal and all that. But then it was right after I left and was working on my own and traveling that I got back into the roots music, and that's where even the older slide and the Delta blues and just really it was just impactful to me. Just the simplicity, oftentimes just the use of the instrument itself as the percussion. It was so simple but so beautiful. And then through that, that's what I played a lot of for a long time, and I think I felt like Maxville was a great place to. Gwen was looking for ways to fill in space between things, so that's just how it started. We started doing that, and then my kids have all started playing music, and so they've all taken part in helping out, but usually just kind of that infill, try to be there to do things. And then the last few years, it's been really exciting. Since we bought the theater, we've been able to draw in some really wonderful talent, and so we had Don Flemons come out twice from the Carolina Chocolate Drops, a Grammy-winning black musician who's and he's really gotten behind the work and is a wonderful, wonderful person, a good friend now. And I know he'd like to come back next year for the 10th. And I would love to see the folks, any of the folks who were raised or children of those people, I'd love to see this next year's event be attended by all those folks. It'd be really fun. So we're working on a really big celebration this year. And hopefully a great, along with your concert in April, another show that weekend as well of the 10th anniversary of the Maxville gathering. So, but I want to thank Gwen for including us in all this. We've had a lot of fun doing it.
Thank you.
And we've learned a lot.
Thank you. And you should see my email inbox. It's just like
yeah.
disaster. So.
I just have two very quick things. One is to throw down a gauntlet to Ezra. I'm right here. I can see you looking around. There are songs that, you know, like when Carolyn and Janet start singing in the county, everybody knows, we all know all the lyrics, you know, there's some music that's just really about this place that we all know. I hope there's at least going to be a 4-measure quote, you know, from some of these in the music, so I hope Janice is cluing you into those. The other thing, when I first started pitching this to Douglas, I walked into the coffee shop, you know, with 20 things on an envelope, and Maxville was one of them. But one of them that you've also in here that we haven't actually stated it is that I was so interested in trying to bridge an urban-rural divide, which we have today. And I'm one of those people that's kind of suspect because I divide my time. But I think we have so much to teach each other between the city and the country, and I'm hopeful that that will make both your lyrics and your music to catch the feel and the spirit of those two very different places, kinds of places.
It'll be the Green Acres interface.
And so yes, I really would like to know those songs.
We'll get you in touch with you.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
What about like work songs? You know, we were listening to Bessie Jones yesterday in the band coming up, and she was actually singing a chain gang song or a work song, a field holler as they used to call them, and I think that might be something that we could utilize. Renee has already written partially another song that could go call and response, or actually it engaged the fish trap crowd very, very well. I was proud of everyone that was singing back and singing along with her, yes, and snapping in response. So I can definitely see and hear something like that. I hinted today I may learn how to play the harmonica, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm part of the trick with creating a new piece, and a piece that is in 2017, right? And it is that we want to be paying homage, but I'm not trying to historically document a song you already know. So it's getting at all of the history of this music, and that goes for, I mean, that's been, and this is a particularly specific case, but that's the nature of jazz. Today, you always, one of my mentors, the great drummer Billy Hart, he always says he's about futuristic thinking, and he says, though, you can't be a futuristic thinker, and futuristic as opposed to just contemporary. People talk about contemporary music. He's thinking about the future of music. But you can't think about the future of music unless you have a deep understanding of the past. So I really want to hear those songs and possibly incorporate harmonica, possibly incorporate all kinds of elements, and yet striking a balance between that and creating something that is also futuristic. And especially, yeah, so I'm just sharing, that's like where my head is at in terms of my role in the project. So thank you for sharing that with me. That's
And don't forget the loggers hoot and holler that we were talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. We're happy to get that. Great. So we're probably getting close to the end of this event. We've been sitting here for quite a while, and you guys have been a really wonderful audience, so thank you so much. I really had a question on my mind that I wanted to ask to you, and that is, so all of us, except for Gwen, of course, who you know, but all the rest of us live in Portland. We live in an urban area. And so my question to you is, why do you live here? I would love for one of you to tell us that. And I mean that, I want you to give me tell me what's your favorite thing about here. Maybe you've always lived here and all your ancestors always lived here. Maybe you moved. Right? So, is there
New York is where I'd rather stay.
So maybe there's some people in the audience who are in both of those categories. Maybe there's someone whose family's been here, quote unquote, forever, a long time. And other folks who might be more recent, who might have something to say about that.
Jack?
Oh, she wants you to answer.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I moved here 8 years ago from Santa Cruz, California, which is on the fringes of Silicon Valley. And I just noticed yesterday online, that the median house price in Santa Cruz County, median house price, is now $850,000. And that's not even San Jose, which is higher. I bought a house here a couple of years ago for $125,000. That wouldn't even be the down payment. That's why I live here. I love it here. I can afford to live here.
Hi, I moved here 9 years ago, and the reason I moved here was, let me see, I used to take vacations. I'd get in my car and I just drive like to Las Vegas or Reno or something. Anyway, I never stayed in a hotel on the way. I would park in a place and just sleep in my car. And I woke up one morning and this word was in my head, Joseph. And I went, well, I know a guy named Joseph, but that's not it. And then I went back to work and this girl said, man, we were at Joseph for the car thing, and it was so great. And I went, Keith, okay. So the next time I went from Portland, I came to Joseph. Excuse me, I almost want to cry, but I walked down the street and it said, you're home. This is it. You're home. So when you said, why did you come to Joseph? I've been wanting to write the book because I find other people all over and I say, so why'd you come to Joseph? And the guy says, well, we lived in Walla Walla. I came here hunting. I went back and told my wife, we're selling the farm, we're selling the business, we're moving to Joseph. And she said, where's that? And there's more stories like that. It's the mountains to me. The mountains are this spiritual, I guess spiritual, but home, something. It's not money. And when I decided to move here, my kids in Portland said, why are you going there? You don't know anybody there. And I said, I talk. I meet people. And the last time my son brought me home here, and it was just before Christmas, and he gets out in the car and he looks at his phone and he says, it's 17 below. Why do you want to live here, Mom? And I kept thinking of this poem, and that would be it. 17 below. Why do you want to live here, Mom? And just answering it in each verse. It's great. It's great.
You haven't written it yet, right?
No.
Keep going.
I've been doing a little. Let's hope it doesn't happen this year.
Do you want to stand up?
I don't get much taller.
Anyway, I just thought I'd share my story a lot. Close? Okay. About why I moved here. I moved here 2 years ago. I came from Idaho. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. And for reasons that I don't need to go into, it was time for me to leave Idaho. And I started praying about it. I had no clue where to go. And but
I knew I needed to move. I knew that that was part of the direction here, moving. And finally one day I just said, God, I'm not going to throw a dart in a map. You've got to let me know where to go. Dart and maps aren't fun. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, I think it was, I had a dream one night of the map of the state of Oregon with a circle around Joseph, a red circle and a big star in the middle. And I go, Joseph, Oregon, is that where you want me to go? I said, I've never heard the place. So I looked it up on, looked up the website for their Chamber of Commerce, showed Joseph, and I went, oh my gosh, it looks like a Hallmark town. Is that where I belong? And anyway, here I am.
Do you have time for one more?
Pearl wants me to say something.
Okay, right up your
Clem, right up your Clem.
The mountains bring you here, but the people keep you here.
Yeah, exactly right. My name's Kay. I'm 71. I've lived in the county my whole life. Pearl and I went to grade school together for the first grade in Wallowa. So I grew up in Wallowa. And when the Bates Mill closed, we moved to Joseph. My folks had a grocery store, a little mom and pop's grocery store uptown. And I don't know what's in there now. I think it's Friends Restaurant or something next to Doomer's, or it's not Doomer's now. It's I go back to all. It's not even Friends, but it's on Main Street, Joseph. Divorced. I live in Enterprise. My kids grew up. They went to Portland, and my son's in Texas. And I have no idea why I do not want to go there. All my friends say, why are you here? This is my home, and I'll be here till the day I'm gone. So there's no place any prettier. I've been quite a few places, and this is it. So, but Pearl and I grew up together. So
one of the things I hear over and over again from folks that visit in our museum is there's just something about it that it's a place of healing. That they just feel like it centers your spirit and your heart. And they don't have an explanation at all for it. It's just like, there's just something about it that I can let go.
You know, you talk about housing. I came from Lewiston. I didn't want to come here. My husband's family farmed out north, which is out by Flora. And so they had built a house. The first house they lived in, you could pretty near throw a cat out a crack. I mean, it was that bad. No joke, it was that bad. And on the walls, they upstairs in this old 2-story house, they had taken cardboard and nailed it on the walls up there, because for insulation. And on the floor, and under the mattress on the bed. You put it there too, you know. So then when my husband's in the Air Force, so we came home. We lived in Lewiston for a while. Well, then he wanted to come back over here, which I came under protest because I didn't want to come. I was in Lewiston. It was shorts and T-shirts in February, you know. Over here at Secondite till April. And I'm still not too impressed. But that first house we rented in Enterprise, no joke. You talk about the houses in the country. This house was in Enterprise, is a 2-story house, and it snowed under the bed. That was how bad that house was that we moved into. So I went into town, which was about 2 miles away, or a mile and a half. I bought an old $4.98 linoleum out of Western Autos, which was on Main Street. We had a Western Auto store. So then I went to the hardware store, and I bought a roll of deadening felt. And then I went to the lumber yard and bought me some paneling. So the lady I rented the house from, my husband and I, they had a plumbing shop. Well, they were tearing up the old hot water tanks. So I got some insulation. So I had 3 kids already. The house was cold, and it snows under the bed. So I went in that bedroom, and I tore all the stuff off of the wall and the casings off of the window. Began to poke that insulation everywhere I could. We had no money. And so then I took and nailed that deadening felt on the wall. Then I nailed the paneling on the wall. Then I put the boards around the window back on the wall. And the deadening felt I had left, I rolled it out across the floor and then put the linoleum on it. We lived there for about 13 years, and the last time I was in that house, that stuff was still in the same state.
Old doesn't necessarily mean not effective. And it is cardboard. We put cardboard in the front of our radiator when it was 20 below. And back in, when I was growing up here, we couldn't wear pants to school. And so,
You got some lovely brown stockings.
well, we wore the pants until we got to school, but we had to take them off. But we figured out that, when it's 20 below or 25 below, this was just in La Grande, so think about how much colder here, is you put that cardboard in front of the radiator, otherwise your car's not gonna heat up and warm the car. It's just gonna stay frozen and it's not gonna start the next day. So I love that. That's a wonderful, made possible thing too. Thank you.
Douglas, do you want to close this out?
Sure.
Before you do, I want to thank you all for sharing your stories of why you moved here. 5 years ago, I was part of a project called The Territory. We have a professor at Portland State University, his name is Darryl Grant, and he wrote a song. I want to get to the burial site for Chief Joseph. I've been compelled to be here, to come here, and to see this part of our land, of our state. I'm going to sing you a snippet of what is titled Chief Joseph's Lament from The Territory.
He's not here.
He's not.
Wouldn't lay him back.
My son, my body is returning to my mother, and my spirit is going very soon to see the great spirit chief. When I am gone, think of your country. You are the chief of these people. They look to you to guide them. Always remember, your father never sold his country. You must stop your ears whenever you are asked to sign a treaty selling your home. A few more years and the white men will be all around you. They have their eyes on this land, my son. Never forget my dying words. This country holds your father's body. Never sell the bones of your father. Never sell the bones of your father and your mother. And I know that these words were definitely spoken by this man. It is recorded. That is what we call the essence, the terroir of this soil. It is compelling. It gathers people. It draws them here. Those of you who said you didn't know why you were drawn here, I have a feeling it is the lives, it is the essence of all those lives that were spent here that draws you and holds you here. Always remember that. Always remember that.
Thanks so much, Marilyn, and thank you to all of you. Thank you to everybody who made this possible. It was great to meet you. It was great to hear from you. We're really happy to hear your stories. they're gonna make their way into the story that we're gonna create. We really love for you to be there, April 13th, OK Theater. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Thanks so much. The email list is over there if you wanna hear from us. And otherwise, we'll see you. Thank you so much.